shadow inventory is something that is talked about in the news a lot, and it's something that a lot of people don't really fully understand what it is. So I wanted to make this video to explain what shadow inventory is and why it's important and relevant to the housing market and economy in general. So I'm going to start by illustrating what happened during the housing bubble and when that bubble burst. And it's this story that we all know too well is a lot of homeowners purchased homes at the peak of the market at peak prices, and when prices began to plummet, these homeowners could no longer afford their homes. So the banks ended up foreclosing on these homes. And it wasn't just one or two of these homes that the banks were foreclosing on, it was millions of homes. So the banks were all of a sudden sitting on millions of properties that were distressed that they were forced to foreclose on. And the bank's not in the business of holding properties or selling real estate. They're in the business of running banks. So they need to figure out a way to release these properties from their balance sheets. And what they did was they would put these on the market for sale as REO properties. Real estate owned properties is what you'll see in newspapers or online if you're ever looking at real estate. And so these are REO properties that the banks are selling. And one of the tactics the banks uses is to price them at very low prices, below market prices, because they want to ensure that they get rid of these properties, that they find buyers for these properties and they're not left sitting on them. So they price them very low, and this brings in, buyers who are looking for a good deal. So this is a buyer. And here's another buyer who's looking for a deal. And again, these buyers are attracted to these bank-owned properties because of how low the bank is pricing them and releasing them onto the market. So this also is priced low. And what this ends up doing is lowering prices for lowering property values across the board across the United States. So these distressed properties that the banks are releasing at these low prices are keeping home prices low and suppressed. And what this ends up doing is it ends up affecting um, a lot of people actually. And let's use this homeowner as an example, who maybe they were waiting, kind of hanging on by a thread and waiting for the housing market to recover and for prices to increase. But instead, they keep seeing these foreclosures come on the market, these REOs at these low prices, and it ends up driving their property value down to a point where they're now underwater. And underwater in real estate means when a homeowner owes more on their mortgage than their property is worth. So these foreclosures and bank-owned properties that are hitting the market are driving prices down so low that some homeowners are finding that their property is no longer worth what they owe on it. And they may get to this point where they don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe they don't feel like their home will ever be worth what they owe on it, and they make this decision to stop making their payments at that point. So stop paying their mortgages. And at this point, they're willing to accept foreclosure. And they've stopped making their payments, so they're just awaiting foreclosure. They're waiting for the banks to foreclose on them at this point because they've come to this point where they would rather have the bank foreclose rather than continue paying on a property that they don't feel will ever be worth what it's owed. And this is known as a strategic default. And it mainly refers to people who can afford, they can still continue making their payments, but they just decide not to, and they decide to accept the repercussions of foreclosure. And the problem is we see a lot of people who are in this situation and who are deciding to move forward with this strategic default. So these are also similar homeowners who might be underwater on their mortgages. Again, they owe more than what their properties are worth, and they decide to stop making their mortgage payments, and strategically defaulting. And this is what the shadow inventory is. And I'm guessing part of the reason they call it shadow inventory is because it is following the bank's foreclosed inventory, the bank's inventory around, in that as the banks continue to release these REO properties onto the market at these low prices, it's keeping home prices across the US down, which is affecting homeowners who, in turn, maybe lose hope, lose faith, and they stop making their mortgage payments, and inevitably these properties will become foreclosures and go on to the bank's inventory as well at that point. And so that's the problem with shadow inventory, and it's a hard number for people to gauge or to get a sense of, because we don't truly know how many people are in this position that are underwater and one day might decide to just stop making their payments and allow their homes to get foreclosed upon. And so, one way to fix this problem is what we're seeing now. Certain banks are offering programs where they're not only reducing the interest on certain homeowners who are underwater, but also reducing the principal. So, allowing them to owe less on the entire amount of their mortgage, principal and interest. And this may prevent this shadow inventory from ever becoming, foreclosure or bank owned inventory. And in doing that, the fix at that point is that we're shrinking the inventory. And as we're shrinking the inventory, this may allow prices to increase, and then we may be on our way to housing recovery. I'm guessing it would be a slow one, but at least we could mitigate this problem of this shadow inventory.